Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special coverage of the Intra-Africa Trade Fair 2021. For the next hour, you will be hearing important conversations amongst world leaders and businesses around boosting intra-Africa trade on the continent.
This is Africa, my friend.
Momentum created the first Intra-Africa Trade Fair and launch of Africa Continental Free Trade Area to drive intra-African trade and integration needs to be sustained. The inaugural Intra-Africa Trade Fair in Cairo in 1918 provided a glimpse of the immense potential that exists for intra-African trade and investments. This trade fair clearly illustrates the determination and resilience of the African spirit. Despite the specter of COVID-19, it is gratifying that today we are gathered here for this opening ceremony to what promises to be a very successful trade fair. Building on the success of the inaugural Intra-African Trade Fair, this second edition of the trade fair will ensure that the efforts aimed at growing intra-African trade are sustained. It is within this in mind that the theme for Intra-African Trade Fair 2021 is building bridges for a successful Africa Continental Trade Area.
It was trade that led to the fragmentation of Africa. It was trade that took millions of Africans against their will into slavery in faraway lands. Today, we embrace the same trade as an instrument for progress, as a tool for reversing the damage it inflicted on Africa over so many decades. It proves beyond doubt that just as it has helped to integrate Africa into the global economy, it can also integrate Africa as a people.
Our mission as Africans is to enhance trade and integration on our continent. So this fair belongs to all of us. The goods and products and services exhibited at this fair represent all the countries of Africa, and its success rests on the participants who are going to be participating here. The AfCFTA aspires to connect all the regions of Africa to deepen economic integration and to boost intra-African trade and investment. This AfCFTA of ours aspires to create a single market for goods and services across our 55 countries on our continent, creating a market of as much as 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. This trade fair is about building bridges. It is about connecting countries. It is about connecting people as well. It brings together governments, buyers, investors, entrepreneurs, manufacturers from more than 55 countries, in many ways to give life to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. The countries of Africa are open for business. Since ancient times, trade has been the engine that connected our people and communities, both near and far. From the ancient centers of learning like Alexandria, Timbuktu, to the northern civilizations in Egypt, Carthage, the western kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, trans-Saharan trade routes, the eastern trading centers of Zanzibar, Mombasa, Mogadishu, to the ancient southern civilizations of Great Zimbabwe and Mapungubwe. For many centuries, Africans traded goods that they produced themselves. Throughout history, Africa has had a network of trade routes that facilitated the flow of goods such as gold, beads, gum, metalworks, salt, textiles, metals, and many others. These trade routes enabled African traders to seek out markets also beyond our continent.
The African Continental Free Trade Area is a potential game changer. First of all, it's a potential game changer for private sector. The ability to work across borders already increases scale for African companies. And it's not only the African industrialists who tend to be in more markets, but it's also the SMEs who have, who make up really, 90% of the creators of jobs, 80% of our economy, and also tend to be the ones who would underpin, the African Continental Free Trade Area. Whether they are part of value chains of the African industrialists or whether they are actually producing and trading across borders. So for us DFIs, we have to make this happen. There's the political side where countries have to ratify the CFTA, they have to negotiate tariffs, etc. But also on the private sector side, we have to do a number of key things. We have to build the infrastructure, especially the regional infrastructure, that will reduce the logistic costs and also reduce the energy costs, make them more reliable and affordable, so that what we produce with value addition is competitive with imports, because we cannot use non-tariff barriers to frustrate imports. We have to be competitive. And so regional infrastructure, making sure it's climate resilient so that this will be long-standing is critical.
I arrived yesterday and I've had the opportunity to sit in on a number of sessions, one of which was manufacturing across Africa and how to increase intra-African trade. There were customs officials talking about harmonizing customs regulations. How do we effectively get goods and services across the continent to really make this one economic community that'd be more attractive to U.S. companies and businesses coming here as they look to interact, trade with Africa. We'd like to applaud the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, where African Union and organizations are looking to break down these barriers to trade just to facilitate intra-Africa trade. So that's important. And on the U.S. government side, we have our, Build Back Better World initiative, which is inclusive. And we want to have two-way trade with Africa and engage with African companies in order to build up the infrastructure across the continent. So you mentioned port infrastructure, for example. A number of the ports are congested, so some countries are building new ports or expanding current ports to be able to increase capacity, again, to bring more products and services onto the continent and also export out of the continent. So there are a couple of things happening here: intra-Africa trade and then increasing African exports around the world. And the U.S. government, the Biden-Harris administration, very much wants to continue to be a part of that effort.
To have implementation of AfCFTA, we really need to have, I call it the triad of empowerment. And this triad of empowerment is 3 pillars. First pillar is private sector strengthening, including women and youth. Second is policy advocacy. So we need policies, we need enabling environment. And third is about product development. So with reference to the whole private sector strengthening, we need a capacity building for our private sector, our women, our youth. What is AfCFTA? What does it mean to them? How we educate them to trade, how we educate them to export, how we build their capacity to have their enterprises, to know about the AfCFTA, to masticate AfCFTA. The second pillar with advocacy, and this about the enabling environment. How can the governments play its role of having a business environment that is really promoting our intra-Africa trade? One of the things that we are really working for is financial inclusion and access to credit. How can our entrepreneurs and our SMEs have access to financial products which suits them to boost their enterprises and to have our intra-Africa trade? Another policy that we are looking for is really about the government procurement, because we all know that for instance, regarding women, in the whole world there is $15 trillion government procurement. Women have only access to 1%. So if you come to all African continent, we need at least 40% for all government procurement goes to African private sector, including women, youth, and SMEs. So this is part of the advocacy we are working. We're also looking for how the private sector could be part and parcel of the whole negotiation of AfCFTA, because if only the government is not including the private sector, we are the one who are implementing it. So this is crucial for the private sector to be there. With reference to product development, if we talk about AfCFTA, what are we going to trade among ourselves? We need a made in Africa product that is strong, standardized, quality, competitive, added value, branding, designing, packaging. We all know that Africa is the richest continent in the world, but really we need to manage our resources. We need to invest in our human resources to build their capacity and in natural resources to add value.
We do believe in partnership, and we do believe we cannot perform any substantial action without the partnership of all our partners who are sitting in this panel and elsewhere. So basically, the bank has been established to foster economic and social development in sub-Saharan Africa. And we do believe that the bank has been working in partnership with all these institutions to provide substantial support to African countries. As far as the economic integration of African countries, the bank is supporting the economic integration through 3 main areas. First, through infrastructure, and the bank is proud to have contributed to the financing of more than 200 road projects linking African countries, and particularly the landlocked countries, and bringing goods and services and letting goods and services moving across Africa. The bank also has been active in supporting port projects, as well as some railways projects and many airport projects. The bank recently also get interested in supporting the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure. As you know, COVID-19 showed the importance of developing the digital infrastructure in Africa to make it easier for people to communicate and exchange during difficult times, such as the pandemic we have just been witnessing for a couple of years.
we have regional economic groups, the currency question has not been solved. So it means we still need, under AfCFTA, for the regulators to formulate a standardized exchange control regulation just specifically for export in Africa. Because if we do that, then it allows for the seamless transfer or for trade and documentation where everybody understands. Because if you try to understand all the documentation and the regulation, you probably won't be able to trade. So that's one place that I do agree requires both the collaboration of central banks and the banks in Africa to get that done.
Partnerships are an integral part of our work streams, you know, because you're right, we're not on ground, there's just so much we can do. Although we do a lot of heavy lifting because we're a development finance institutions. We work through partners. In our lending, many times we work with financial institutions. In PAPS, as you know, we're working with the central banks, the Association of African Central Banks, you know, we're piloting in WAMSI. I just came from a factoring workshop where we are piloting on factoring. Of course, you know my passion for factoring, where we are working with FCI as a strategic partner. But in places like Nigeria, working with Nigerian Export-Import Bank, we can't, if we talk about finance alone, the gap is $110 billion. There's no one bank that can do it. You have to galvanize. You also mentioned about the deep dam in Tanzania. You know, we were the global advisor for that dam in Tanzania, where we raised almost $1 billion of contracting guarantees. We worked with Egyptian banks, local Egyptian banks, and worked with local Tanzanian banks and ourselves. You know, so it's in our DNA to work with partners.
PAPS is that one rail that will touch practically everyone's life on the continent, from individuals to businesses to governments. So it's going to be able to support person-to-person payments, business-to-business payments, government-to-government payments, and so on. So you would find that, for example, an airline that's operating in one country and today has a challenge with repatriating its collections in one country, will find that PAPS is able to seamlessly make that happen. So for example, a large airline maybe from Kenya, Ethiopia, operating in Nigeria, making collections in Nigerian Naira, will find that repatriating their money to their home countries actually becomes easier. They're able to move money from Nigeria in Naira and be able to receive it in their home country in, say, Kenyan shillings or Ethiopian birr. So it's going to touch different industries, and what that does is, once payment is seamless, it will certainly accelerate trade on the continent.
The MOU we signed with the AfCFTA Bank fits right into what we call a smart and strategic partnership with other African institutions, and that includes the AfCFTA Bank, the African Development Bank, and other banks on the continent. The MOU basically has three important aspects of our development. Number one, we believe in our line of work, it's extremely important to help our member states to profile the risk with regard to disasters. In this case, talk about drought, tropical cyclone, and flood. That information will help our member states to decide whether to return the risk or transfer the risk to the insurance market. So with the AfCFTA Bank, we've decided to join forces and help African countries to improve their capacity to profile the risk with the hope that they can decide with that information what to do with the risk in terms of transfer or retaining it. The second aspect of our partnership is about premium financing. In our line of work, unfortunately, funding is always extremely challenging for our member states to afford the premium required to transfer the risk to the insurance market. So we believe with AfCFTA Bank, we'll join forces to provide the additional resources required to help our member states to pay for the premium with the hope that over time, as they build the culture of disaster risk management, they will pick up themselves their own premium requirements and be able to really embed into their public policies the whole culture of disaster risk management. And last but not least, the AfCFTA Bank and ourselves believe we have what it takes to be thought leaders in the business of disaster risk management. So therefore, through evidence and storytelling, we're going to actually document the successes we have across the continent to demonstrate that Africans need to plan better and value the importance of early warning systems
but more importantly, to anticipate a disaster actually before it occurs, so we can protect many vulnerable communities across Africa.
Our proof of concept, the first Intra-African Trade Fair, which I referred to earlier, was a huge success. It attracted 1,100 exhibitors and about 7,000 participants from 45 countries, and facilitated the signature of deals worth about $32 billion. I'm pleased to inform you that about $25 billion of the deals signed during that trade fair have been implemented, with another $2.5 billion being processed, representing an incredible 83% success rate. As you can see, the Intra-African Trade Fair platform offers a comprehensive solution. It is not just a trade fair. We have come to Durban with the plow firmly in our grips. We have set high targets for the 2021 edition. We expect at least 1,000 exhibitors. I'm aware that we have achieved about 1,100 exhibitors. We expected 10,000 visitors. By the last time we checked, registrations are close to 11,000. We have 92 countries represented in this trade fair. And we're expecting that deals worth about $40 billion will be closed.
It is by harnessing all our capabilities, both existing and emerging, that we will accelerate our continent's economic growth and integrated development. It is our expectation that this trade fair will further cement its position as Africa's premier trade platform, where African manufacturers and producers can promote and sell more goods labeled "Made in Africa."
There are two ways in which we hope the Intra-Africa Trade Fair can help the local economy. The first one is in securing direct orders, in getting buyers from elsewhere in the continent to see the industrial capability here. And the second one is to build the relationships that will be needed when we launch the African Continental Free Trade Area. Once the AfCFTA, as we call it, is launched in the sense that the rules of origin is agreed, then businesses will need to have partners. From what I'm hearing from exhibitors and from people who are visiting from elsewhere in the continent, that kind of relationships are now being built, and that is fundamental to opening up the opportunity of a continent of 1.2 billion people. South Africa has 60 million people. Quite a bit of our current manufacturing exports go to the rest of the African continent, but we see an opportunity to grow that even more. And what we're looking for is not to damage businesses in Nigeria or Kenya or anywhere else on the continent. We're looking for complementary trade. We're looking for ways in which South Africa can produce that which is currently bought from outside the continent. Kenya can produce what is from outside the continent. Egypt can do the same. And through that, each country can increase the size of their order runs. We can get economies of scale. We can become more competitive. We can attract new investors from abroad, from all over the world, who will see the advantage of setting up businesses here on the African continent.
It's time for us to take a short break, but stay with us as we bring you more riveting conversations here at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair right after this. Welcome back. Let us visit some of the exhibitors at the pavilion and find out what kind of commitments world leaders have put pen and paper to.
We've also introduced new elements that, in our view, will help create continental value chains. The IATF partners have collaborated with the African Association of Automotive Manufacturers to introduce a biennial Pan-African Auto Show as an integral part of the trade fair. We have launched this collaboration here in Durban, a city that is doing its best to become one of the big auto hubs on the continent. We recognize that a robust automotive industry can catalyze the emergence of interconnected supply chains spread across the continent. With an average vehicle boasting over 30,000 components, a vibrant automotive sector can trigger the emergence of rubber and rubber-related auto parts industries in rubber-producing countries of Nigeria, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire. It will also boost activities in metals-producing countries and also in leather-producing countries. It will also foster the development of petrochemical industry. The auto industry is a big enabler, can be a big enabler for industrialization on our continent. It is for these reasons that the IATF partners are working with the Association of African Automotive Manufacturers under Afrexim Bank grant funding to put in place a continental automotive strategy. That is why Afrexim Bank has supported the African Regional Standards Organization to harmonize over 43 auto standards for the continent.
This is a 100% locally manufactured vehicle by Toyota right here in Durban. Hence, it's written proudly made in KwaZulu-Natal. Toyota was kind enough to have this vehicle displayed. This is the Toyota Hilux. Toyota manufactures, as you know, 5 different brands right here in Durban. And the latest investment is a 2.7 billion rand Toyota Corolla Cross, which was launched by the president a few weeks ago. So we're quite excited about this and this opportunity. The Intra-Africa Trade Fair, of course, creates a wonderful opportunity to showcase locally produced products for exports. And also we're looking at how we integrate and increase the trade value within the African continent. This is the largest platform on the African continent, and it creates a sense of energy to showcase what Africa can do best. 54 countries that are exhibiting and that are participating in this session, 6 heads of state plus our heads of state. It's a true boost, and it's a commitment from the African continent to show that Africa can actually boost its trade. We're looking as KwaZulu-Natal, we've actually developed through the directive of our Premier, we produced the export strategy for Africa, taking into account what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area indicated. And from there, we've identified products that we can export into the continent. Over and above that, we're looking at products that we don't have, that we're currently importing from other regions. We're trying to look at how we can rather prioritize the African continent for importing those products rather than other regions. Because if we committed to intra-Africa trade, we've got to start right here on our backyard.
By promoting trade between African countries, we are strengthening our own continent's industrial base and ensuring that we produce goods for ourselves and for each other. 2 key developments of global significance can serve as a stimulus for Africa to act in unison. Firstly, the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic in the first quarter of 2020 exposed the frailty of African economies. More importantly, it sent a powerful message to our continent about the dangers of over-reliance on external sources to meet its growing demand for food, medicines, and essential supplies. It clearly demonstrated that Africa needs to produce its own food and medicines, to strengthen continental supply chains, and to invest in infrastructure and capacitate African institutions. To illustrate the extent of the challenge, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa estimates that Africa imports about 94% of its pharmaceutical and medicinal needs from outside the continent at an annual cost of $16 billion. Secondly, the African Continental Free Trade Area has the potential to accelerate economic growth across the continent and create opportunities for entrepreneurs, for small and medium enterprises, as well as large corporations to flourish. The AfCFTA will provide new export opportunities for made-in-Africa products and enable member countries to trade with each other without tariffs or other hindrances.
Africa's time. If we don't make it this time, we'll never make it again. We need to invest in the future. If you look at this continent, by 2050, it's estimated that 65% will be under the age of 35. So we need to invest in the youth. We need to empower them. We need to empower their ideas. We need to help them to scale. We need to help them to grow across the continent. We also look at from a policy perspective that as African governments and as African governments need to create enabling policies, enable business to be able to grow. But another part of the investment was looking at Africa no longer just being a place where you extract raw materials, but also a place that completes the value chain from a beneficiation perspective. So it should be straight from the ground all the way onto the table, and no longer be a continent that's begging, a continent that moves from aid to trade.
FEDA, which is an acronym for Fund for Export Development in Africa, is an Afreximbank initiative that has been created specifically to target to provide equity capital in the missing space in the African market, basically to achieve three objectives. Number one is to support the growth in intra-African trade. Number two is to support the growth in value-added export, what we also call export development, ex-Africa. The third one is to support the growth in industrialization on the continent. And Afreximbank, has been at the forefront of leading development and initiatives like that on the continent. And FEDA is, one of the game-changing equity investing piece, because when you look at the environment, find there's a lot of capital, people would say, but equity gap is still there. So about $110 billion from an equity gap perspective. And structurally also, funding is not going to certain sectors that will release and unlock value for the continent, which is around trade. So we are set up to do that. And if we also look at where this capital, is sort of flowing into, a lot of capital on the continent is on the debt side. So about 10% of funding that comes into the continent is what comes into the equity space. And equity, as you know, from an instrument perspective, is that long-term patient capital that will unlock value. Debt, a lot of SMEs may not have capacity to even borrow. they may not have structure to be able to attract debt. But for equity, we don't just provide funding, but we actually partner with people. So there's a partnership mindset that we approach our investing with. And with that, of course, we get involved, we get on boards of companies that we invest in, we agree strategy, we implement, we execute. So where are we today? I'm happy to share with you that between last year and now, we've registered quite a number of milestones. Number one, we've been able to basically put together a team. After getting operationalized in 2019, sometime in the last quarter, we've been able to bring together our team, which is very experienced and also diverse. A lot of talent, experience both on the continent and outside as well. So we bring that team together, and we've started working together. Number two, we've raised our pipeline of deals, good quality, high potential opportunities.
The reality is that maritime infrastructure, obviously there's a little bit of investment that we need to do there. I suppose we can do better even from a tech point of view, even though we've got an online staging for our trucks, it goes beyond that. But I suppose one of the reasons we've decided to look for partners in running some of our ports is precisely for that reason, that we do have a weakened balance sheet that we know for a fact we are accepted, and we are of the view that if we bring on board partners, then we can leverage off their capital, of their resources, so that we can better run our ports. We're not by any means walking out of that business, but we're simply acknowledging that we can no longer do it on our own.
We have considered that cash being king, we had to inject immediately fast disbursement. That's what we have done for up to 500 million euro. Immediate disbursement accessible either to the sovereign, to the public, and to the private sector, immediate, so cash, so that we can refuel the engine and make sure that we keep the ball running. This is the first thing. The second thing is, and which is basically our fundamental role that's been described into our strategic plan called Joliba Plan, the name of this river, gathering almost the eight countries of our region. Basically, the idea is to foster the development on 5 major sectors, which are, and that would not come to a surprise to anyone here, which are infrastructure. Today, as we speak, we have like 7% of our balance sheet dedicated to infrastructure as a whole. Then energy, and again, that cannot come to a surprise to anyone here. And we have decided to make it a specific goal, because no development without energy. That's an obvious goal, right? The third thing is agriculture, with the two extremes. The first one being food security. The second extreme being agribusiness and agribusiness. How do we go up the chain? How do we go up the value chain? All right. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing is everything related to real estate, and notably everything related to social housing. The last, but surely not the least, sector is everything related to health and education. And the pandemic, again, has put on the table this idea that everything related to health and education was the battle of the battles. So the last thing I would like to add, if I may, yes, is the question of the strengthening of our Tier 1 capital. It is obvious for all of us, and I think my brothers sitting here and there would agree with me, the question of the equity, the Tier 1 capital is critical.
African Union Development Agency, and maybe just to share a little bit on its mandate before I go into some of the work we're doing. Through the reform agenda of the African Union, the AUDA NEPAD has been given a really huge mandate. First of all, to be the agency that pushes for implementation of Agenda 2063. And the issues of youth are very much central to the Agenda 2063. We also are the technical interface for Africa's strategic partners, and we offer advisory services to member states and to regional economic communities on a whole range of development issues. So when it comes to the issues of youth development, particularly entrepreneurship, one of the major projects that we are implementing currently is the 100,000 MSMEs, 100,000 medium, small, and micro enterprise project. Now, this is an unprecedented and scalable digital platform, which has a number of key pillars. We have the MSME Academy, which provides capacity building and training for entrepreneurs. And through this pillar, we have about 13 countries that are on board. We've had 25,000 MSMEs registered, and about 14,000 have participated in online platforms for this capacity building project. Then we have the MSME market, where we are facilitating for entrepreneurs to have access to a much broader market. The other important pillar is the financing, where we are brokering financing for youth-run MSMEs. And we have a partnership project with the EcoBank, which has provided some financing for a number of MSMEs to really upscale their activities and move from informal to more formal, operations in the market. And if I may just add, with the AfCFTA, of course, we all know that this is providing a huge opportunity for Africa. And for us at AUDA NEPAD, the advisory services that we provide to member states and to the regional economic communities, I think makes it logical that with deeper integration of the regions and stronger regional blocks should translate to continental gains at the level of the AfCFTA.
With the projects that are coming on board with the Nyanza, we also have Wilma on board, which is an oil refinery company, Edible Oils, also starting, with their building of their projects. They have undertaken youth in the area, put them in their base program. 5 of them already have been undergone the program and are already employed and will be working with that project. We are also having the bursary programs as the Richards Bay IDZ for the youth in the area. There is an enterprise development wing in our business development which looks into the projects that are youth oriented, and that way it is ensuring that we are empowering our skills, our youth with the skills that will be relevant for the investors that are coming on board, as well as in terms of the SMME development. We are looking at creating and making sure that it's not only the jobs that are created with these investors, but the suppliers of these investors should be our people in the area. And we have youth, especially in the ICT space, that we are also developing to ensure that they are supporting the projects that are coming on board.
We do know that if Africa, we kept talking about our strategy, Impact 2021, Africa Transformed. To come to this point, we did a study and did a mapping of where we need to intervene. It was clear to us that if you think about the youth bulge in Africa, the demographics, the immense talent, we couldn't ignore it, and somebody had to do it, as seemingly difficult as those spaces might be. And so we decided to take the bull by the horn and introduce the a creative and cultural industry strategy. And there's so many initiatives around it, of which trade and investment promotion is one, and the kind of things we're doing here. But there are others, because in that space, what we're looking to do is to bridge information gap, bridge capacity gap, bridge financing gap, and bridge the gap of weak institutions policy, because intellectual property infringement in the creative is colossal. So in doing that, we came up with a number of instruments. Financing is key. So we did, and in In the program we sponsored, the Creative Africa Exchange in 2020, we announced a $500 million package for the creative industry, debt equity and technical assistance, as it were. We've very recently we actually disbursed to the film industry in a collaboration of Nollywood and Hollywood, but driven by the Nollywood very recently. We were just in Portugal a few weeks ago, where we sponsored some 20 African designers, budding African designers, to expose them to markets and brands abroad, working with the city of Porto. In Portugal. We're also creating a cooperative arrangement as a way to help in that cohort of the fashion industry, the way to lend to them. We also have even a creative advisory group. And I must say that our creative industry focuses on film, music, fashion, arts and crafts, and even sports. So it's an area where we're paying a lot of attention. We want to support it, working with partners, of course, and then the youth startup as well. I have to tell you, one of the biggest successes of IAT of 2018 was around the youth. In the BCS was one of those youth that came under the Tony Elumelu Foundation. If you listen to President Orama's speech at his opening, he spoke about him. He's a Nigerian youth he tells us of how his booth in 2017 saw a flurry of people. And after the trade fair in 2018 and early 2019, he was heralded with a contract to the Singaporean government to make drones for the agricultural purposes. PADUP. Olivia tells us of how he grew her, she does women's sanitary products. Yes. And PADUP, she tells us, and we were in that panel together, where she expanded from 11 countries to I think about 18 countries just from being at the trade fair. Those success stories galvanize us to do more. And that's why we decided to dedicate, working with the African Union, of course, and the AfCFTA and AE Trade, to dedicate a program for the youth.
The strategy going forward is twofold. One, we should continue to take concrete steps to make sure, as I said earlier, that we match the market access that the AfCFTA opens, that we match it with commercially meaningful trade opportunities. That's very, very important. All of these products that are exhibited here, they should find a market across the African continent. So if you are in the pavilion of Ghana that I just visited, you must find a market in Tanzania. You must find a market in South Africa. That's really the strategy, is to give commercial meaningfulness to the AfCFTA through these trade fairs. And second, from a trade negotiations point of view, it is to make sure that we conclude the outstanding negotiations on rules of origin, on local content, particularly for textiles and clothing, one of the drivers of Africa's industrialization and job creation. We know from the example of Lesotho how textiles and clothing is critical in terms of employment, particularly employment of women for decent jobs, or decent paying jobs. So we've got to conclude the negotiations on textiles and clothing as a strategy going forward. On currency and payments, it is true what our colleague asked. We are now piloting the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System in 6 countries in West Africa. The last country to switch onto that piloting was Nigeria. The report that I have is that there are transactions happening under PAPS and that it is going quite smoothly. We are consulting with central banks because central banks have to approve the switching onto that platform of commercial banks in their jurisdiction. And that consultation is ongoing. Our ambition is that as many countries and as many commercial banks as possible should switch on to the platform across the African continent by the middle of next year, so that we see the results of a truly pan-African payment system, so that we reduce and ultimately eliminate this reliance on a third currency. If you transact today, you are routed via London or New York when you send money abroad. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we want to create our own self-sufficiency in payments, as I said, so that we reduce the cost by $5 billion.
This also requires that we ease and improve the way of doing business in our countries and provide protection for investors through strong and independent legal systems that will ensure that the sanctity of contract and fair and expeditious legal processes. It means also that investors must be sensitive to our continent's development goals with regard to jobs, industrialization, localization, and the development of local entrepreneurs.
Considering that this has been done in the midst of the pandemic, I would say is mind-blowing. You consider it extremely successful, even in the best of times. More than 11,000 visitors, buyers, exhibitors, more than 1,100 exhibitors, with another 200 exhibiting virtually. We have all the countries who are here, about 95 countries represented. You have so much vibrancy. All the pillars, the Creative Africa Nexus, with all the creatives from all over the world, all the Africans in the diaspora and within the continent. The Automotive show, the first ever that we've held, extremely successful. The Youth Pavilion, so much vibrancy. So I would consider the IATF 2021 as a huge success, as something that puts us on the path to using this platform to begin to realize the objectives of the AfCFTA.
And that brings this Highlights special to an end. Thank you for joining us at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair 2021. We'll see you again in 2023 in Abidjan. Until then, it's bye for now.